Hey guys, welcome back. So today I wanted to go over a few points in the story of Adam and Eve, and this is going to be a pretty quick video. There's really not a lot to talk about. I mean, I could talk about it. There's a few theories in this story that I think are pretty compelling, and so I wanted to talk about that. So I'll just start off. Has anybody ever heard the theory that the tree of knowledge of good and evil is not a literal fruit tree? And I'm sure I'm sure a few of you have, um, and I think it's definitely worth considering. Matter of fact, there is one theory that I lean more towards, and I'll talk about that just a little bit, and then I will give you a few possibilities for what the coats of skins could have been. And so I didn't really have time to put together like a notes that I usually go by. I go by some notes. I'm just going to skim through a few points that are in the book. Um, if you want the full disclosure, it's in chapter 4, the very last section, shifting the Torah paradigm. Actually, there might be a few points in this video that I don't go over in the book, but it's a lot more detailed and goes into the Hebrew and things like that for why a lot of people believe this theory. So, but I think overall, when it comes to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, I think we can all agree that it signifies the awareness of sin. Once Adam and Eve, when they disobeyed the Creator, they became aware of their transgression. So I think for a lot of people, it comes as a surprise that there are more possibilities than a literal fruit tree. So, and I think there is room for possibility. So that's why we need to consider what could have occurred, despite the final conclusion on the matter. And I'm not trying to convince you one way or another, but I'm just trying to loosen those theological gears that tend to tighten in place. Your mind can come to a fixed position sometimes. All right. So yeah, the theory goes like this. So the fruit tree was animal DNA. They killed an animal, and that's how it happened. All right. So, but I mean, seriously, what if the text that we read in Genesis hasn't been preserved as consistently as we think it should, or what most people in the Christian churches assume, or the Torah communities? If the tree of knowledge of good and evil was a literal fruit tree, then it's kind of odd to think that the Creator would place limitations on the very form of food that He created for humankind to eat. So there's a few details like that I'm going to share with you. I mean, like plants, fruit, it was all created for food. So why would the Creator create food just to say that we can't have it, or this specific food item? You know what I mean? If the forbidden fruit was literally a fruit tree, then why bother to create it in the first place, only to hold it over their heads? And I get it. I know we were taught that it's the common logic. That was the purpose for the tree, that God just created something as a test to demonstrate free will. But when you really look at it, though, testing their loyalty, it wouldn't require a special fruit to observe their devotion to Him. I mean, if they just stayed away from the animals, just by not killing, not eating the animals, this would have been enough. It would have demonstrated that Adam and Eve remained submitted to His design. So basically, abstaining from something abstaining from something that was never meant for food would have been practical enough. It would have made more sense. So, and I'm kind of coming at this from a logical perspective instead of a theological perspective, and what's written, what do we find in Genesis? And that's okay to do, okay? We're supposed to use our logical thought process. So basically, it didn't require some type of mystery fruit to allow Adam and Eve the chance to obey the Father. That's the point. God didn't need to create something extra to provide them that opportunity. He had already created something that was forbidden, the animals. So, showing compassion towards the animals was sufficient to observe their devotion. And the more you think about it, it makes sense to think the Creator's limitations pertained to something that was never meant for food instead of something that is described as food in all other accounts, fruit. So fruit is without debate. It's always described as food in the scriptures, and flesh, the animal flesh, it has always been the subject of debate, right? So if you ask yourself, does it make sense to think that God forbade Adam and Eve to eat something designed as a food item? Or does it make more sense that he would forbid something that was not designed as food? And knowing that God doesn't tempt people, according to James, it does seem odd to think that he made something with the same attracting properties as all the other fruit in the garden just to mark it off as you can't have this. It's off limits. So it's that logic right there. If we use that, if we say that God, created all the fruit trees for you to eat except this one fruit, it's kind of you're kind of put into that position where you have to believe that God intentionally tempted Adam and Eve, and which he doesn't do. But when you weigh out the circumstances, it seems it makes more sense that the forbidden fruit was animal DNA, something that wasn't meant to tempt them, something that would have been done out of rebellion to design. Okay, eating fruit, it's just a part of design, but eating animals violates that design. So it's more logical, coming at it from a logical perspective, it's more logical to infer that God placed limits according to his order of design. And if I were to be fair and I were to go by the text, I wouldn't say any of this, because the text does seem to, it tells a story about a fruit tree, right? So, I wrestled back and forth on this for a while, but I don't think it's a far stretch to consider this other possibility. If you go by the text, yeah, it was a literal fruit tree. But if you let your logic help to interpret, it makes a lot more sense that it was an animal. Okay. And there are a few other details that I share about, the tree being in the midst of the garden, how God said you can eat of every tree and things like that. I'm not going to get into that in this video, but if you want to visit the book on that, I encourage everyone to look at the book. It lays everything out. So like I said, I could go both ways on this. I think it's possible that the story of Adam and Eve, it's evolved over time, and it may have been altered through translation, but if not, it doesn't have any negative impact, or it doesn't challenge the truth of the biblical garden diet. And that's something that is annoying to me, is that people will say, well, God, he commanded them not to eat the apple. That a lot of people say it's an apple. It's just fruit. That's all the Bible says. It doesn't say anything about an apple. But a lot of people will jump to that and say, well, fruit's not always good. God commanded them not to eat fruit. And they think in their mind that this somehow challenges the fact that he forbade humanity to kill and eat the animals. And I don't know why people try to use that argument, because it makes absolutely no sense to say that God, he commanded them not to eat fruit in the garden. And it makes no, you're ignoring every other tree in the garden that he said, you may eat freely. This is the food I gave you. So I don't know, that argument's, it's almost not even worth addressing because of the stupidity behind that. I mean, am I the only one that sees it? It's kind of like the argument that I shared yesterday, a Venus flytrap. A lot of people will say, well, Venus flytraps are carnivorous. Well, how does that have anything to do, first of all, with the fact that we are not supposed to eat animals? And they'll say, well, if plants are carnivores, then God designed plants to eat animals. And then they'll try to say that these plants have their own minds. And well, no. If you know anything about Venus flytraps, they get triggered when something crosses their path. There's these little sensory, there's these needles. Now, people act like this plant has a mind of its own and that it's choosing to eat flies because it's a carnivore. And then they pretend it has a digestive system like animals and humans, which it doesn't. It just absorbs whatever comes into its path. And it's as simple as that. It can't make a conscious decision because it has no brain, and it can't digest food because it doesn't have a digestive system. It doesn't have blood flowing through its veins. It doesn't have the breath of life. Okay? So, and it was neat too, because the video that I shared yesterday was somebody feeding strawberries to the Venus flytrap, and it was behaving the exact same way that it would if a fly were to have landed on it. Snaps shut. Okay? So you'll run into these silly arguments anytime that you start talking about, showing compassion towards animals. We were never created to kill or eat the flesh of animals. People will just, it's like, I don't know if they just have a treasure chest full of stupid arguments that they just choose from and they think they're good. I really like the one about, field mice get killed when you're harvesting crops. And people will say, so the fruits and vegetables that you buy from the store, it contributes to killing animals. And they think that's a good argument. Well, it's not, because like when you're dealing with harvesting fruits and vegetables and field mice accidentally get killed, that's the point. It's an accident. These farmers are not out there intentionally killing animals to harvest their flesh, which is, someone pointed out to me that, have you noticed people are starting to use that word harvest more when referring to animals? Anyway, that's the difference. If a field mouse gets killed while harvesting crops, that's a lot different than, hey, let's intentionally kill this animal so that we can feast off its flesh. I mean, all of these arguments are so easily debunked, and it surprises me so much that people use these arguments and they think that they have something solid to come against vegans. Anyway, I need to get back on track. I'm going down that whole rabbit hole, or that whole. I'm getting sidetracked. We're talking about Adam and Eve here. Like I said, the text seems to tell one story, but it's like when you use your logic, it tells another. If the forbidden fruit was animal DNA, then other details do fall into place. Like Adam and Eve, if they killed and consumed the flesh of animals, or let's say it was a sheep, then it makes sense why God would have covered them with coats of skins, because it would have been his way of marking them with that object of their iniquity. It was a constant reminder of their disobedience. That, to me, that makes sense. And here, I'm going to go ahead and share this, put it up on the screen real big, because there are a few different theories. Some people believe the coats of skins were plant-based, and which is reasonable. It's the Hebrew is not in favor of that idea, but I do believe that it would have been more resourceful to assume the use of a plant or a tree. And even among my different friends, I have a lot of people who understand, um, in the truther community and the Hebrew roots communities, a lot of people that I know understand. It's common knowledge that plant fibers are the most beneficial for clothing. Plants provide healing frequencies that can only be accessed by pure organic fabrics. But whichever way you look at it, whether we believe the forbidden fruit was an animal or a literal fruit tree, there are possibilities either way. So the bigger issue is whether Adam and Eve knew about the sacrificial commands later given to Moses. I mean, that's been a big part of this shifting the Torah paradigm. It's the central debate of the book. If Mosaic law is equivalent to the Father's eternal law, then we should expect the biblical narrative to elaborate on this dynamic in earlier occasions before the story of Exodus. Like, if this was the origin of animal sacrifice and God wanted it to happen, it was something he commanded or demanded or required, then this story would have been that opportunity to elaborate on it, to go into detail and show you the meaning and things like that, but it doesn't. That's why people put these theories into the story of Adam and Eve and say, oh, well, the coats of skins was God's first atonement for their sin, which it wasn't. You don't get any type of explanation about that in Genesis. People are just bringing Mosaic law into the story of Genesis, into the story of Adam and Eve, and what they understand of the atonement system. Okay, if Mosaic law was previously known throughout time, then it's just odd that we don't find a detailed list of instructions until after Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt. Okay, there's nothing before that. This would have been the perfect opportunity to explain animal sacrifice as it pertains to God's moral character, right? If Adam and Eve knew the same commandments that we read about in the book of Exodus through Deuteronomy, such as sacrifice, priestly initiation with blood, preparation of the Passover, then why is nothing mentioned prior? And I mean, it's simple. It's because Scripture introduces the legal system when it was initially given later in the story. And during their short-lived time in the garden, Adam and Eve, they were only given a handful of commands. That's all they needed. They had no knowledge of sin, and neither were they weren't accustomed to the pagan practices of the nations. They were commanded to be fruitful and multiply, subdue the earth, dominate over the animal kingdom, meaning that they were to be good stewards and good priests over the animals. They were supposed to eat from the vegetation of the land and abstain from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which a lot of people have likened to thou shalt not kill, which, that's what we're talking about now. But overall, Adam and Eve they were never given Levitical instructions for animal sacrifice because they didn't need them. As long as they obeyed the few moral guidelines that were relevant to their circumstances, they were keeping Torah. Okay, they were Torah observant, and they kept to the higher morale. It was a higher moral standard because, at that time, killing, nobody had even killed. But after the fall, after what they did, that's when things get complicated. That's when you start needing more laws. When you don't live up to the highest moral standard, you need more laws to keep you in line. Okay? I think we can learn a lot from the story of Adam and Eve. Either way, whether you believe the forbidden fruit was a literal piece of fruit or animal DNA. But it really is compelling to think that the first time humanity was deceived was an attempt on their perception of food. I mean, I've heard many teachings on the power of fasting, and it seems like many of the teachers or commentators, they always make some type of comparison between the appetite and vulnerability and how it can be used to persuade the individual to the point of deception. Like different stories throughout the Bible, like Jacob and Esau, it demonstrates that hunger can be intense enough to cause a man to forfeit his birthright for a bowl of lentil stew. You know what I mean? Um, but I mean, people who experience spiritual breakthroughs from fasting, they don't even consider that they're practicing veganism during each fast. And whether it's a complete abstinence from food altogether or a Daniel fast, whenever a person embarks on a fast, they are eliminating animal DNA from their diets. And I believe this is what gives us access to our Creator, because it purges those items from our temples that were never meant to be consumed. So in effect, it's because our lifestyles resemble the design of creation during a fast. That's what opens the door to pure spiritual blessings from the Father. So let me go over these real quick. The plant-based skin from a tree, that was one possibility for the coats of skins, okay? And then Hallelujah Acres, they mentioned this to me a few weeks ago. They said, could it have been the wool from the sheep and not like the actual hide? And I know I had previously talked about this with John the Baptist, because his coat was the hair of a camel's mane. Have you ever seen a camel's mane? It looks just like a lion's mane. They're really thick, and it makes the most sense that that camel hair is what he wove into a garment to wear. And it made sense to me with John the Baptist, but I had never thought about it being the wool of the sheep in this situation. And so a few weeks ago when I heard that, I'm like, yeah, it makes perfect sense. It very well could have been the wool from a sheep, not the actual hide. Okay. And that's given, that there wasn't an animal that was killed in this event. Another possibility that it was the hide from a sheep that a lion had killed. And if you read the story of Adam and Eve in the book of Adam and Eve, then it does talk about how a lion killed a lamb in the garden, and that is the hide that was used to cover them. That's just another possibility. And it could have been, like I said earlier, it could have been the actual hide from a sheep that Adam and Eve killed, and that was their sin. And then finally, the last bullet point here is, and I think this is really good too, that the skin that they were given to cover their bodies was the moment when God put mortality on humanity, and he gave them their mortal skin, our flesh that we are used to. This body that we know when we're born, we have this body with mortal skin. It was God's way of putting mortality on humanity. Before that, we were light beings, similar to angels, okay? And we were immortal, but after they sinned, he put mortality on humans. So I think that, to me, makes probably the most sense, especially going along with the story, is that, if you eat this, you will die. And then that's when, they did. And then God put the mortality on the humans. So I'm going to wrap this up, guys. The thing is, the enemy knows that one of our greatest weaknesses is our appetites, okay? And if it was possible enough to convince Adam and Eve that something was food, even though it wasn't something that God actually designed as food, then it's no less possible today. Matter of fact, it's more possible today that people can be deceived about this. The very first attempt on humanity, is the same tactic being used to deceive the modern world, not only in the Christian and Hebrew roots communities, but society. Beef, it's what's for dinner. My friend Nathan uses that all the time. We all know the slogan. Our perception of food is literally the oldest trick in the book, and most of the population has been duped into falling for it again and again. So that's what I'm going to leave you guys with. I know I didn't really get into detail a lot. Like I said, it's a short section, but it does go a little bit further into the theory that it was animal DNA. It shows you the Hebrew. I don't think it all lines up perfectly, but it goes over a short article where the Hebrew's broken down, the different words. So, and you know, I may pull it up here just so you guys can see the words real quick. I'll leave it on the screen, and then I'll let you guys go. You guys see that real good? I guess I better blow it up. So yeah, the fruit in the original, it can mean progeny or the offspring of a family group. I have the Hebrew in the footnotes, so if, you know, like I said, it doesn't all add up. Tree in the Hebrew, talking about a family tree. The knowledge is just our perception, our awareness, becoming conscious of the sin, good and evil. You know, you can visit that if you want. It's very compelling, but I don't think the Hebrew completely lines up. But it's one of those things where you just got to use your logic more than anything. And it makes sense coming from that perspective. It could very easily have been an animal that they killed and ate, and you know, something taught by the watchers, or at least an angel or the deceiver. You know, whoever would have had access in the garden at that time. And I'm not, you know, and it could have been the serpent deceiving them very easily. You know, anything could have happened. And then over time, it's just like the story of, like the game of telephone, the story just evolved into what we read in the Bibles. You know, I'm not going to say either way, definite. You know, the text tells one story, but like I said, my logic tells me another. So there it is, guys. That's all I have for today. I'll talk to you next time. I don't know how soon I'm going to put out another video. I really wanted to get into Paul. You know, I have a lot of friends who are anti-Paul and a lot of friends who are pro-Paul. And, you know, I've just always been kind of somewhere in between. You know, I just look at him as another, just, you know, another guy who had his own twist on the gospel, you know, and a lot of times, a lot of the things he said didn't line up with what the other apostles said, you know, and I really wanted to get into that because when it comes to his take on eating animal flesh, I think he was very inconsistent about his stance, because sometimes he does seem like he's on the pro side and sometimes he's on the anti side. And it really just depended on who he was around. And so that's why I think he was just kind of flaky about it. And I wanted that to be my next video. I'm not sure when it's going to happen. You know, hopefully next weekend. We'll just have to see how the next week goes. So thanks for watching again, guys. You know, give me a like, subscribe, and share the videos. I will talk to you next time.